Hello everyone, you're watching Voice of South Asia. This is Health Talk with Nausheen Mealbread. शादियों की दावत हो या ईद की पार्टी, हम में से अक्सर लोग बिरयानी और कौरमों पे खूब हमले करते हुए नज़र आते हैं। ना सिर्फ हम पेट भर के खाते हैं बल्कि जी भर के खाते हैं, और अगर यही आदत आपका रोज़ाना का मामूल बन जाए तो इसे एक ईटिंग डिसऑर्डर कहते हैं। कोविड-19 पेंडेमिक की वजह से आजकल हम घरों में ज़्यादा टाइम स्पेंड करते हैं और इसका नतीजा ये निकलता है कि हम अक्सर बिंज ईटिंग या इमोशनल ईटिंग करते हुए नज़र आते हैं। आज के एपिसोड में हम यही जानेंगे कि क्या वजूहात हैं कि हम बिंज ईटिंग करते हैं या अपने आप को ज़्यादा खाने से रोक नहीं पाते या बेवक्त खाने से रोक नहीं पाते। तो जनाब, आज के एपिसोड में हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं मिस सफ़िया सुलेमान, जो कि हैं एक रजिस्टर्ड डाइटिशियन और साथ ही वो हैं एक इमोशनल ईटिंग कोच। Hello Safia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so Miss Safia, I want to know, what is the relationship between food and emotions?
Okay, so emotions have played a role in a person's relationship to food from a really young age. From crying when you're hungry as a child to desserts or sweets being used as a form of reward or punishment until you eat your vegetables.
Right.
And over time, that relationship gets reinforced and it can actually lead to a negative relationship with food. And that's why it's so important for a person to actually understand where the emotions and where their relationship with food lies.
So it really can be connected for anybody at any point of time.
Definitely.
Okay.
Your emotions always have a role when you eat. There's no person that eats with zero emotions.
Right.
And it's just important that a person doesn't feel guilt and shame, because that's when we get to the part where it's negative emotional eating.
Right. So when we talk about negative emotions, there are also positive emotions, like if there's a comfort food or a food that makes me feel happy, those are my positive emotions, but that can also be related to, food, the same kind of creates the same relationship as food and emotions.
Yeah, so with emotional eating, it's not always bad.
Okay.
It has a bad rap on the internet, but it's
Right.
not always a bad thing. So if a person is sad and they turn to food, or if a person is happy, like for a birthday party or something, and they turn to
Right.
food, it's perfectly fine, right? But it's when you feel guilt and shame after it, that's when it needs intervention. That's when it's actually causing a cycle of emotional eating.
Gotcha. So what is considered as binge eating in textbooks?
So binge eating is when you eat a large amount of food in a short period of time, and you know that you're full, you know that it's past your physical comfort level, but you continue eating because you just psychologically can't stop. And it always leads to feelings of shame, guilt, and regret.
Gotcha.
So the difference between binge eating and overeating is binge eating, you're past your comfortable satiety, but you push past it because you just don't know how to stop.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So why binge eating is considered a disorder?
Okay, so disordered eating is when your relationship with food and your body is not a good one. But there is a difference between just binge eating and binge eating disorder. So binge eating disorder falls under an actual eating disorder. And that's when it actually needs like proper intervention. It may require medical interventions, a therapist as well, and a dietitian. While binge eating is just a form of disordered eating, like emotional eating, stress eating, and that a dietitian alone will be able to address it.
Gotcha. So the next thing I want to ask you is how binge eating is different from anorexia and bulimia?
So anorexia and bulimia are actual eating disorders. Those are much more complex. It involves behavioral thoughts, it involves eating patterns, and it also involves a lot of disordered body image. While binge eating is more just of a disorder because there's not certain categories that it ticks off as compared to binge eating disorder.
Gotcha. Well, next question I want to ask you is what happens to your body when you binge eat? But before we get the answer, we're going to take a short break. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Health Talk with Nosheen Mulebred. We have Safia Suleiman today with us, and she is a registered dietitian, and she's also a health coach who specializes in emotional or binge eating. So, Safia, before we went on a break, we were talking about how's it different than other more serious eating disorders like bulimia and anorexia. Now my question is, what really happens to your body? Because you're not really thinking when you're binge eating. So what really happens to your body when you're eating, a large amount of food when your body doesn't really need it?
So first of all, you feel very physically uncomfortable because
Right.
you've surpassed your normal satiety levels. And that can actually lead to you start feeling very lethargic and tired, because now your energy all shifts to your gut, to your digestive system, and it wants to make sure it can digest everything. So everyone that experiences a binge always says they're feeling tired all the time, they're feeling lethargic, and they try controlling the fact that they're feeling tired, but they're not realizing that it's because they're binging.
Well, I never thought about it like that. That's interesting. Well, next thing I want to ask you is, and that's probably a golden question for today's show, is what makes you binge eat, or when does this person start binge eating?
Okay, so I love that question.
Okay.
First of all, there's a lot of different factors that can lead to a person to start binging, but some of the very common ones is a person is either restricting food or mentally restricting food, or there's some emotional trauma. So let me go over that part, because there's two different forms of restriction. One is the physical restriction, where a person is dieting and they're restricting calories or they're skipping meals.
So it could be any kind of diet?
Any
Okay.
kind of diet. So anything where you're trying to manipulate your body to shrink itself instead of actually understanding your body's hunger and fullness. And then mental restriction is when a person starts to feel guilty. So a lot of people will label foods as good or bad, or healthy and unhealthy. So when they eat a food that they categorize as less healthy, they start feeling guilty about it.
Right.
So that's a mental form of restriction, is that
Right.
guilt that follows up with it.
Right.
And then emotional trauma is when a person just doesn't maybe have a support system. They don't know how to take out their emotions or process their emotions, or from watching a parent binge
Right.
or eat in an unhealthy manner. Also from being exposed to societal norms of the thinness.
Right.
So that
you
also
have
can-
to look a certain way. You have to be a certain weight, or you have to be, because when you're younger, you're thinner naturally. Most of the times, if you're eating well and everything, your lifestyle's good, you're thinner. But with age, when you grow older, you're naturally gonna, pack some weight. But people want you to still look the way you looked in your teenage or maybe in your 20s. So
Definitely.
that's a lot of pressure.
Exactly.
Since you talked about so much social pressure when it comes to looking the certain way and having a certain weight, I do want to touch another subject over here about moms who give birth. And after that, there's so much pressure, like you have to bounce back within days, like you're some kind of celebrity that comes out of the hospital looking like you never had a baby. So what do you do? How do you help those women?
So I speak to a lot of moms that struggle with that, and the first thing I address is their relationship to food and their relationship to their body.
Right.
Because society puts a lot of expectations on them, but they also do, because they have no idea how their body's going to transform through the pregnancy and post-birth.
Correct.
So I help them figure out how they can start incorporating foods that make them feel good and focus on that.
Right.
Because the only way that you can, sustain healthy habits is if you focus on the habits and not on your weight, and reinforce positive body image.
Right.
Because your body may not shrink back to what it was pre-birth.
Exactly. It takes 9 months for you to get to that stage when you have a full-term baby, you deliver a baby, and it just can't go away within a day.
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely. So I've heard so many moms that struggle with that, and that's why we focus so much on their relationship to food and their relationship to their actual body image, because it's just an image.
Right.
It's not actually how you look, it's what you see to yourself,
Right, absolutely. Well, next thing I want to ask you is actually, let me rephrase it. Is emotional eating the same exact thing as binge eating, or there's some kind of fine line between them?
Okay, so it's not the same thing, because with
Okay.
emotional eating, that's when you're using food to fill an emotional void. But with emotional eating, it's like I said earlier, it's not always a bad thing. So if you, for an example, are going to the movies and you're not physically hungry, but you have popcorn, that's a form of emotional eating. Right?
Because you want to have popcorn when it just makes you feel good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with binge eating, that's when you're eating to a point of discomfort. You know that you're full, you know that you can't take it enough, but you just psychologically can't stop.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how does one identify between real hunger or emotional hunger, or if you're binge eating, how do you find the real physiological hunger?
Okay, so with emotional hunger, it's like a sudden onset. Because maybe it's like you got home from work, you're feeling stressed out, and you're like, I just want a bag of chips. It's very specific also. But physical hunger is gradual. You gradually start getting hungry.
Okay.
And there's not something specific that you want. Like whether it's a pasta or whether it's like roasted chicken.
You're just hungry for anything.
You're hungry for food.
Right.
But emotional hunger is very specific. You will crave something specifically that you want, and that's the only thing that will satisfy it.
Oh my God, this is so true, because it does happen to me, especially at nighttime. I go to the fridge and I'm like, I want something sweet or I want something savory.
Exactly.
So that could be emotional or binge eating that I'm not aware of.
So it's like when I used to put my daughter down for a nap when she was much younger, I would just want a cup of coffee and some cookies with it.
Right.
And I wasn't physically hungry, but that was my form of taking a break.
Right.
But I never felt guilty after it. So it wasn't like a negative form of emotional eating, but it definitely was emotional because I wanted a coffee and a cookie.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So when I was doing research of this show, I came across a term that's called mindful eating. So we want to know what mindful eating is.
Okay, so mindful eating is when you're so aware in the moment of what you're putting into your body, whether it's a food or a drink, and you do it in a non-judgmental way, and you sort of reflect on how that food makes you feel.
Gotcha.
So you're very aware of all your senses, and it's very engaged in that meal experience. So if you're mindful, it means you allow yourself to like look at your food, smell your food. So all your digestive enzymes and everything gets started before you start eating your food. So you're not distracted, you're not scrolling on Instagram, you just focus on that meal.
Right. You're not watching TV or anything for that matter to distract you.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And if you're eating mindfully, it also means that you're more likely going to realize you're full before you get stuffed. Because you're not distracted, you're not multitasking, you're just focused on that meal.
Right.
So
it is very important actually to be able to, eat mindfully.
Definitely. And what I always tell my clients is that you might not be able to be very mindful of every single meal, but at least one meal a day, focus on it, give it your full attention. Because you want to stay in tune to your body's hunger and fullness. You don't always want to eat a little less than your body's saying or eat a little more.
Right. And that's kind of tough too with the lifestyle we all live. We're always in a hurry. With COVID-19 going on, it's a little different. Of course, we're spending more time at home and it's a different scenario. But overall, we're still busy. We're not always paying attention to what we're eating.
Exactly. And that's why I say at least one meal, you need to try and have that mindfully.
Right.
So that you stay in tune to those, body signals and what your body is telling you.
Right.
Because in a perfect world, you'd want to be mindful with every single meal, but realistically, it's not always possible. So at least if you can put aside time for your evening meal or your family meal and focus on that so that you know exactly how your body feels when it doesn't like something or when it does like it. So the next time, you can remember that experience and do it differently.
Right, that makes sense. Well, I want to know who's more prone to binging. Is it men or women, and why?
So it's more women.
Okay.
Statistics show that women are more inclined to start binge eating or any form of eating disorder or disordered eating. However, I will say this. Stats are very skewed because men are very embarrassed if they have disordered eating, and it has to get really bad before they actually admit themselves or their family admit them. And I also think that women are more prone to it because society puts so much more pressure on them. And a woman does experience much more body changes than men, given their hormone changes, puberty, birthing a child. There's so many other changes that they go through as compared to men.
Right. Well, so let's say if somebody is going through, the disorder of binging, how does one recognize that, hey, this is a time I really need some help, and I should go seek medical help?
So when a person starts feeling out of control and they start getting depressed and anxious and start isolating themselves, that's when it's getting really bad, and that's when it's time to really reach out to someone. But I always tell people, don't wait for it to get that bad. You
Right.
can get help when you already feel like you're turning to food for everything, or you don't know how to cope with your day-to-day errands or day-to-day life, and you
Right.
need some support.
Or if it's lingering on your head the whole time, that, oh my God, I'm feeling guilty because I had that meal. I'm not going to do it again, but you end up doing that again. So it's like a cycle.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
So whenever there's feelings of guilt, shame, and regret following up after eating anything, that's when it needs help. That's when the relationship towards food is sort of like injured, and you need to start working on that, and need to start clearing up the fact that food shouldn't make you feel good or bad.
Right.
It's just food.
So how do we actually escape this vicious cycle of emotional eating?
So the first thing is to practice self-compassion. So it's like we said, it's a cycle. It's you eat something, you feel bad about it, you stop eating it, and then you binge on it again.
Right.
So the only way to actually break that cycle is by, in that moment, realize what you've done, tell yourself, I'm going to forgive myself for doing it, and try and figure out why you did that.
Gotcha.
So a lot of people try and treat the symptom. Binging or emotional eating is just a symptom, but the root cause is deeper. There's something else that's causing it.
Okay.
Is it that you're lonely? Is it that you don't feel like you have support? Is it that you're
some kind of life event?
Exactly. So figuring out that why is what's going to stop it, but not trying to restrict that food again.
Right. So when you're helping your clients with emotional eating or binge eating, do you ever refer them to a psychologist?
Definitely.
Okay.
So now that I work online, I don't work with any clients that have an active eating disorder. I only work with disordered eating.
Okay.
But if a woman tells me that she's struggling to the point where she's having really negative thoughts about her life, and I feel like, you know, working online is not the best thing, and she actually might need to see a psychiatrist or therapist, we can do it hand in hand, or I can refer her to one just in a brick and mortar practice, and, you know, hand her over to someone that can take it from there.
Gotcha. Well, here is the time that we take a short break. After we come back, we're going to ask what are the physiological reasons, or what could be the physiological reasons behind binge eating or emotional eating. So stay with us. Welcome back to Health Talk with Nosheen Mulbrad. We're in conversation with Ms. Safia Suleiman, who is a registered dietitian, and she's also a health coach for binge eating or emotional eating. Before going to the break, हम बात कर रहे थे कि क्या physiological reasons भी हो सकते हैं binge eating के पीछे. Let's find out. So, could there be any physiological or physical reasons behind binging?
Definitely. So if a person is restricting the amount of food that they're taking, that would definitely lead to them eating larger amounts, because they're making up for the fact that they weren't eating according to their body needs.
Right.
And a lot of people think that, you know, jumping on a diet that they've seen on a blog or they've seen on the internet is
A
like
fad diet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is the best thing for them to do so that they can, you know, lose the weight or whatever.
Right.
But they're not staying attuned to their body. They're not seeing a dietitian. They're not doing it in a healthy manner. Then it definitely is going to lead to their body compensating by eating larger amounts when they get the chance.
Right.
Right.
So यहाँ पे मैं actually एक चीज़ डिस्कस करना चाहूँगी, और वो मेरे ख़ास से बहुत से लोगों को मैं जानती हूँ जिनके साथ ये प्रॉब्लम है. You know, let's say at night time we're trying to relax and we're watching something, and we get up and we go to the pantry and we, you know, stand there for 5 minutes trying to see what we want to eat. And then we go back, and 5 minutes later we open the fridge and you know, expect magically something will appear and I'll get to eat that. So you're pretty much eating out of boredom. I know I do that. How do you stop that?
So I feel like eating out of boredom is because a person feels so uncomfortable not having like a purpose, right? In that moment, they don't have
Yes.
something that they need to be doing, so they wanna keep busy, right? And what I tell a lot of my clients to do is not to just turn to food. Just enjoy the fact that you're watching TV, or find something else that you don't like doing. I mean, sorry, that you like doing.
Okay.
So like a hobby. A lot of people will be like, on weekends, that's sometimes when they binge, right? And it's because they don't have anything to do. They're not working and they don't have all those responsibilities.
Right.
So if you find something else that brings you enjoyment, whether it's reading a book, whether it's journaling, going out for a walk, that can help fill that void of boredom.
So it pretty much means that you have to keep your brain busy.
And you have to appreciate the break that you get. So
Right.
if you are sitting and watching a movie, just enjoy the movie. It's very hard to train your body to accept that there's nothing else that's so urgent for you to be doing.
Right.
But you need to start doing it. You need to reflect on the fact that you're turning to food, you want to grab something because you want to be multitasking. But let's just sit here and try and enjoy it to the best that you can.
Right. So someone who is binge eating, is it true that after you binge eat, out of guilt, you just starve yourself to feel better that, okay, I ate so much, now I should starve myself?
Yeah, so that's exactly why it leads to the cycle. So a person will binge eat and then they'll feel guilt and shame and then they'll restrict themselves.
Right.
But it only leads to a binge again because by the time they start eating, they're so hungry
Right.
that they can't be mindful. They can't focus on their hunger anymore and their fullness anymore. They just want to eat and eat and eat to fill the fact that they've starved themselves for such a long period of time.
So is it true that people who have gone through pretty much all their lives, gone through weight issues, do they binge eat more? Do they tend to binge eat more than other people?
So I've seen people that binge eat in all different spectrums of life and in all different body sizes. So it just depends on what you've been exposed to and how you see yourself.
Gotcha.
But binge eating does lead to weight fluctuations. And a lot of people were in a perfectly so-called healthy body,
Right.
but started binging and then gaining the weight.
Right.
And then started having the weight issues.
Right. So, there's so many fad diets, and we talked about that earlier too. When you're picking certain kind of diet, most of the diets have certain cheat days. On those cheat days, you can just eat whatever, or however much you want to eat, because you're the primary reason you do that is to shock your body, and then when you go back to your diet, you start losing more weight. And it's pretty much true for a lot of different types of diets. So when you do that, do people tend to binge eat more in those days, or how do you really differentiate that you're just cheating on your cheat days, or you're just binge eating?
So when a person is binge eating, that's when they eat to a point of discomfort and then still go past it because they psychologically can't stop.
Right.
But a person that is on a diet and has a cheat day, they will tend to eat whatever it is they weren't allowed to eat on the diet,
Right.
but they won't push past that comfort level.
Gotcha.
And if they do, then it's getting close to binge eating.
That makes sense. So one more thing I want to talk about is intermittent fasting. बहुत से लोग ये इतना common है आजकल, और बहुत से लोग intermittent fasting करते हैं, including myself, I do too. So what I want to know is, intermittent fasting में ये होता है कि certain number of hours you fast, and then you get an eating window. So let's say, for example, you fast for 16 hours, then you get 8 hours of eating window. So how do you really differentiate that I'm not binging in that hours during my eating window, and I'm actually mindfully eating? So how do you differentiate really?
Okay, so with intermittent fasting, during that period where you're allowed to eat, the main differences would also be, then again, staying attuned to your body, being able to understand that you're full and being able to stop and then eat again when you feel like you can and you have space for it. But if you're pushing past that and you're not being able to stop when you're full, that's binging then. And that's binging during your window period. So it's very counterproductive.
Gotcha. So are there any certain kinds of foods that may encourage you to binge eat or emotional eat?
So that's a really funny question. So any foods that a person purposely restricts, whether it's physically or mentally, so whether you're on a diet and you're not allowed to eat something, or you always feel guilty because you label something as junk or unhealthy,
Right.
those are going to be the foods that you binge on.
Gotcha. So when someone comes to you and they have already recognized that, hey, I may have a problem with, eating. I may have an eating disorder. What's the first step to help them?
So the first thing we do is we try and discover the why and where it's rooted.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, going back, asking them questions, trying to figure out where it's rooted and when it started and what the triggers are. Because if a lot of people will be like, Safiya, if I start controlling my portion sizes, or if I do this, will I, lose the weight? Will I get healthy and start to implement healthy eating patterns? But if we don't get to why you feel unhealthy and why you're binging or emotionally eating, it's going to be very hard for us to figure out how you can get healthy.
Gotcha. So I'm going to go back to the food question I asked you earlier. Are there certain kinds of food that you should pick, as part of your mindful eating that keeps you more satiated and keeps you more satisfied, so you don't tend to binge eat or you don't go towards an extra snack later on?
Okay, so when you're mindfully eating, it's you eating in a non-judgmental way, right? That's a very important component of mindful eating.
Gotcha.
So it means you allow yourself to eat a piece of cake or you allow yourself to eat salad, but you stay in tune to what your body says. So maybe you realize if you eat 2 pieces of cake, you start feeling tired because your body just has so much to digest, right? And because of your sugar levels just drop. So with mindful eating, you don't control or try and manipulate your eating patterns because you actually understand how food makes you feel. And if you can focus on that feeling and how you want to feel, you won't turn to so many pieces of cake or cookies because you know you're going to end up feeling tired or lethargic.
Right. So are there any lifestyle changes that someone can make to stay away from binge eating or emotional eating?
I definitely would say that if a person can challenge the food labeling, so stop saying food is unhealthy or healthy and stop attaching like a moral value to it, because the thing with attaching a food label to any food item is that you start feeling bad or good when you eat something. And food's not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be a punishment or reward. It's just supposed to be nourishment and nutrition. Right? So removing that food label allows you to start having a healthier relationship with food, and then you can focus on how food makes you feel instead of trying to manipulate what you eat.
Right. Well, this brings us to the end of the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if you would like to consult with Ms. Safiya Sulaiman, who's a registered dietitian and she's also a coach for emotional eating, her information is mentioned on the screen, so go check it out and contact her if you would like. क्या आप जानते हैं कि किसी भी तरह की डाइट फॉलो करने वाले लोगों की अक्सरियत यानी 77 to 95% लोग जो हैं वो डाइट छोड़ने के बाद वो सारा वेट फिर से गेन कर लेते हैं, और उनमें से 30 to 60% लोग ऐसे होते हैं जो पहले से भी ज़्यादा वेट गेन कर लेते हैं. सो आई थिंक द टेक अवे फ्रॉम टुडेज शो इज़ यू हैव टू हैव अ गुड रिलेशनशिप विद योर फूड. यू हैव टू बी इमोशनली बैलेंस्ड to be able to feel satiated and feel satisfied after eating, so you don't end up binge eating. तो जनाब यहाँ लेते हैं आपसे इजाज़त. जाने से पहले सिर्फ इतना कहेंगे कि अगर आप किसी भी मुश्किल से गुजर रहे हैं तो हमेशा याद रखिए कि ऊपर वाला आपका हाथ हमेशा थामे रखेगा और आपको कभी अकेला नहीं छोड़ेगा. अपना प्यार और अपने सजेशंस हमें भेजते रहिए at info@vosa.tv. यहाँ लेते हैं आपसे इजाज़त. अगले प्रोग्राम में आपसे मुलाकात होगी एक नए गेस्ट, एक नए टॉपिक के साथ. टेक केयर.